want to check the sound is in fact working, everyone, before I continue. Just want to check the sound. Yes, it is. All right. Welcome to the Yours Truly Baphomet podcast for Dr. Timothy Leary's High Priest, everyone. And we are now going into the 10th trip. So it looks like it's going to be continuing on from last time, which Timothy Leary went in and gave the mushrooms to some prisoners. And so far the results looked pretty good. So without further ado, I'm just going to get straight into it. And I think what's interesting is... this I Ching thing, I ended up looking into it. It's pretty interesting, actually. Something was nagging me to try it, and it's actually quite an elegant divination system from what I looked at when you're thinking about like as opposed to tarot. So if that's your kind of thing, I'd recommend maybe looking into it if you'd like to have an oracle, or because you might need some assistance. Because I find usually with divination, with tarot cards and other things, you still need your consciousness. You can't just let it do it all for you. Like the whole point, I think, for the most part, is to help you stimulate your unconscious. Or the other part is, since synchronicity is a thing, that it is always pumping out a mathematical correspondence. Because my theory is if you have like because if the whole world is made of mathematics, you would generally need to sort of tie your consciousness with the mathematical output of the outcome. So you would sort of sit there and meditate and sort of touch it and the coins or the cards or whatever, and this will in a way unconsciously generate a mathematical conclusion. That's actually just something that came to mind, and I didn't really think about it, so I'm glad I thought about that. My bloody desk is a mess, everyone. But I'm glad I talked about that, because now it's something I could probably talk about, as I'm getting more and more into mathematics. All right, let's begin. So, and the prisoners will become priests. Spring 1961, guides Jim Berrigan, Don Santian. Ugh. Fellowship with men, the creative heaven, the clinging flame. Heaven together with fire, the image of fellowship with men, thus the superior man organizes the clans and makes distinctions between things. I don't know what number hex that one is, but whatever. I Ching is very interesting. All right. So, the first psychedelic session at the prison set up oh, shit. The first psychedelic session at the prison set up powerful repercussions. First, there was the effect of the little group of voyagers. Strong bonds had developed. We had been through the ordeal together. We had gone beyond the games of Harvard psychologist and convict. We had stripped off social facade and faced fear together, and we had trusted and laughed. It's so heartwarming. I feel at home in the prison. It always works this way after a good trip. You die and then you are reborn. The place of your rebirth is home. This is not metaphorical. It's a neurological reality. Interesting. During the psychedelic session, the nervous system returns to that state of flux and unity chaos of infancy and spins beyond familiar time-space where there is no home, because all is a 2 billion year process of homing. As the session ends, one is reborn smoothly or with a jolt. This is the period of re-entry, the return from space to the planet. That place to which you return becomes neurologically engraved in your subsequent consciousness. It is a new home, a new neurological center. In scientific papers, we describe this as the process of re-imprinting, a rewiring of the nervous system. There is a strong biochemical attachment to the people, the objects, the sense and sights of the place to which you return. This accounts for the LSD cult phenomenon. In our case, the hospital room of the prison had become a center, a home. It was wired into my head. Wild. The morning after the session, driving back to the prison was like going back to some sacred place in my skull. Beating the prisoners was like our family reunion. Our status in the prison was changed, glances of respect and interest. Prisoners approached us as we walked across the yard to ask if they could sign up for the mushrooms. Damn. Guards and parole officers stopped us to ask questions or to request that our favorite prisoner be admitted to the psychedelic group. We spent the next 2 weeks discussing the reports that the prisoners wrote and comparing notes on the trip. Then we ran second session. This time the prisoners were more sophisticated. There was no sitting around on chairs in nervous anticipation. As soon as their energy began to radiate through their bodies, they headed for the cop, fell out and closed their eyes. For the next 2 or 3 hours, they lay engulfed in the visions, occasionally sitting up to smile or make some zen comment. The Harvard guides changed the records and sat quietly, watching the cellular clocks in the room, whirring, occasionally approaching the voyagers. A hand on the shoulder, a smile, the cosmic nod of affirmation, and the look of wonder and sharing. Oh, Doc, amazing. This stuff is amazing. It's always amazing, Tony. Do you want anything? Yeah, Doc, I'm thirsty. I brought the glass of water. I'm sitting up. Tony spilled a few drops. His eyes riveted on the little wet puddle on the grey blanket. Water, he said, wondering. Life and water. Where does the water come from, Doc? We are water creatures, aren't we? Yeah, my body is the sea. Damn, man. Sometimes the microscopes of inner vision focus on their lives. Jerry huddled under his blanket, sobbing, his head shaking back and forth. Oh, Doc, oh, what a selfish fool I've been. My family, wasted years. Will I ever get another chance, Doc? Can I go back and try again? 9 in the 4th place means he climbs up on his wall. He cannot attack. Good fortune. It keeps going, Jerry. Every moment it starts all over again. We arranged the room in sacred design. Incense, candles. The convicts would lie watching the flickering flame. Outside the barred windows, they could see the prison wall and the guard tower. Candlelight and the flash of sunlight on the guarding rifles. Why are there prisons, Doc? What are we doing here? Wanted men. It's insane, Doc. We're all insane. Us cons and the cops and the guards. How did we get into this? Each session was a cosmic drama. Confusion, humor, lots of laughter. Olympian multi-level god laughter, loneliness, tears, terrors, suspicion, trust. After the 3rd session, the convicts repeated the personality test for measure changes. We brought the test folders into the hospital room and handed them to the inmates. No secrets. We explained what the test measured and what the result meant. They had changed, showed less depression, hostility, antisocial tendencies, more energy, responsibility, cooperation. The objective indices so dear to the heart of the psychologist has swung dramatically and significantly in the direction of increased mental health. By explaining their test results to them and letting them handle their own test scores, we were training them the same way we trained Harvard graduate student in psychodiagnostics to learn what the test meant. How they were changing, the prisoners were becoming psychologists. They loved it. Fierce debates about personality characteristics, the psychiatric diagnostic game being played by the cons. After a few weeks of discussion, we planned with the inmates of the continuation of research. The convicts were to select the new recruits for the group. They would learn how to administer the psychological tests. They would give the orientation lectures. They would run the project. Here, the reconciliation that follows quarrel moves nearer. It is true that there are still dividing walls on which we stand confronting one another, but the difficulties are too great. We get into straits, and this brings us to our senses. We cannot fight, and therein lies our good fortune. At this point, we ran into prison politics. The social structure of a prison is like any village. There is a very explicit hierarchy. The inmates themselves run the prison. All the guards and administrators do is keep the peace, but the gut, muscle, moment-to-moment, space-time issues are determined by prisoners. The inmates belong to invisible social clans, and the clan leaders decide what happens. If the warden and guards violate the dignity and prerogatives of the convict leaders, there is trouble. And all administrators want to avoid trouble. One day when we walked into the hospital, there were 2 new inmate medical attendants. They were men in their 40s, tough, proud, hard customers. They walked up to me. Dr. Leary, I'm Jim Berrigan. This is Don Satan. Sounds like Satan. That's funny. We'd like to talk to you. Fine, but I'm late for the project meeting. Maybe later. No, the meeting can wait. Let's talk now. I looked at them closely. They were men of confidence and dignity, power holders, leaders, dressed them differently, and they could be sea captains or chief surgeons or Broadway promoters. I nodded and they motioned me down the hall. We walked into the hospital kitchen. I'd never been there before. Don walked to the stove and turned on the burner under a coffee pot. Bacon and eggs, Doc? No thanks, coffee will do. Jim and Don sat on the high serving counter and grinned. We've been watching this mushroom business, Doc, and it looks pretty good to us, and we've decided to join your project. We'll be a lot of help to you. We've arranged transfers to the hospital so we can be right on call. The words were cool and cocky and seemed to leave no room for question. Explained that the decisions about who joined the project were made by convicts in the group. I couldn't interfere, but I'd pass their names onto the inmate planning group. Jim and Don grinned. I don't think that those guys will give us any static. Doc, we usually get what we want around here. Don't we, Don? Don nodded. There was muscle and hard prick behind the words. I liked them and had to respect them, and it was more politics. Dealing with the powers that be, I grinned and said, I'm pleased that you're interested. It's a new and good thing we're doing, and it works. It's also fun. I hope you'll join us. When I mentioned to our planning group that Jim and Don had volunteered, there was an uneasy ripple and murmurs about who exactly is in charge, and I thought the project was going to be democratic. By democratic, we mean that we should run it, right? Here we go. We had already run into some problems of power and authority and turned our decisions over to the convicts. The intoxicating taste of command, 2 of the inmates had thrown themselves into the doctor-psychologist role with great energy and had developed pompous professional facades in dealing with their clients. They tended to be fussy and schoolmastery punitive. The other cons didn't like it, and everyone was uneasy about Jim and Don coming into the project. They were big men in the prison. They were boss cons. They'll take over. Hey, wait a minute. If they come into the project, they'll have to take the mushrooms. There was a thoughtful silence, and then everyone began to laugh. And if they take the drug, they'll flip out of their minds and be on the game of being boss convicts, right? And they'll strip naked like everyone else, and they'll come back changed like the rest of us. If the mushrooms really work, if they produce insight and love, then they'll work for Jim and Don. Yeah, and for the guards too. Let's invite the screws to turn on. So it was agreed that Don and Jim could join the group. They were tested and listened to the orientation talks and held out their tough guy hands one Sunday morning to receive the sacrament. This is going to be interesting, I reckon. I think it might be another short one. This trip was being guided by Gunther Whale and 2 inmates from the original group. After an hour, Jimmy Berrigan started the show Signs of Distress. Jimmy was one of the hardest men in Massachusetts. He belonged to a famous Boston waterfront gang, a rugged, violent tribe. Jimmy was a professional outlaw, proud, touchy, cocky, a man whose culture and whose long life was totally dedicated to strength, bicep control. And now, as it comes to all men, the ultimate humiliation was coming to tough Jimmy in a sunlit room in the hospital ward in Concord Prison. Jimmy suddenly discovered he had fallen into a trap. He had bulled his way into the project to enhance his power in the prison. The mushrooms were good, and anything good in the prison belonged by tribal custom to Berrigan. Now he lay on a cot, rendered weak, his mind spinning away, his control slipping, overwhelmed by 1,000 shadowy cellular faces mocking his illusions of strength. Here we go. This wasn't what he expected. This was a different high from booze and bennies and happy pills. He had fallen into a diabolic con game perpetuated by Harvard psychologists. After 45 years of defiance and arrogance, Jimmy was fallen. He raged in despair. He should have known better than to trust his natural enemies. These smooth-faced, glib, middle-class professionals, what a suck he was to fall for their line. To forget that power was everything. To let them slip him these immobilizing pills. Well, he'd go down finding. He tried to sit up, but his body was a tangle of pulsating wires and warm liquids. It was a nice feeling, but he felt strange and weak. He looked around the room, which was alive with belted radiance. Where were his tormentors? There was Gunther, young pipsqueak kid who couldn't hold his own for 5 seconds in a barroom brawl, now smiling at him in malevolent triumph. He motioned for Gunther to come over and then fell back on the pillow. How are you, Jimmy? I'm terrible. I'm dying. Well, you got me, you clever bastard, but I'm not finished. It may have been me, but my brothers and my gang will get you for this. You'll be in a cement bag in Boston Harbor in a week. Gunther's face looked blank. Get me for what? For trapping me this way, you smug Harvard fink. Gunther felt a flicker of fear. He was turned on too. Visions of gangland slayings, cruel, implacable hoodlum revenge. How did he, a well-brought-up middle-class Jewish boy with good school grades, get himself involved in the scene of wickedness and violence? Because of the mushrooms, the ecstasy had led him on. He had been warned of this, the grim Judeo-Christian retribution. You pay for your bliss, now he was paying for his mushroom kicks. He looked down at the face of his murderer, the rugged, waterfront, grimacing features of this hood, the devil Berrigan whose dread retribution was to fall on him. Thoughts of escape flashed through his mind. He glanced at the barred windows. He was trapped in the prison, surrounded by thugs who would spring to the command of the master criminal. Tears came to his eyes. What a tragedy to be cut down in his promising youth. He cursed the day he had even listened to the mushroom song and all the lib psychedelic teachings which sounded so good but which just lured you into the void of hell. The two men stood transfixed in horror and hate, slim, Harvard, and grizzled outlaw, caught together in some cold, hopeless whirlpool of cosmic energy. Frightened and frightening each other, blaming each other, man hopelessly isolated from man, the other man in the room watched silently. Jimmy snarled again. My brother will kill you for this. How can they kill me, Jimmy? I'm dying right now. Dying, death, rebirth, some long forgotten wire of memory flickered. Death, rebirth, trust the process. Gunther closed his eyes and the words came to him, the prayer. He struggled to move his throat and tongue. And the words came out, quavering, shaky, a strange little voice, but the message was there. Jimmy Berrigan looked up in disbelief. His eyes widened. Then he understood. From somewhere in his childhood, his Irish genes, his rugged Celtic past, the same message sparked. Jimmy began to laugh. Amazing. Unbelievable. God did exist. The old teachings were true. Not in the stilted, phony, effeminate accents of the Boston priesthood whose piety he despised, but in the voice which sighed and breathed in his cells. He reached up and grabbed Gunther's hand, and their eyes met in a smile, and the session reel spun on. The initiation of Jimmy and Don increased a feeling of centerness at the prison. Coming to Concord was like returning on pilgrimage to a holy place. A conspiracy was emerging. We started plotting a mass prison break. It is the nature of fire to flame up to heaven. This gives the idea of fellowship. Here, clarity is within and strength without. The character of a peaceful union of men, which in order to hold together needs one yielding nature among many firm persons. That's actually really interesting. That's actually a good quote. Fire yields up to heaven. Didn't think about that. Fire yields up to heaven. Okay. The name of the game was Keep Out. We agreed that cops and robbers was ridiculous. Hold on. Straight with that, it's a peaceful... Okay, yeah. The name of the game was Keep Out. We agreed that cops and robbers was ridiculous. The prisoner guard game was absurd. The perpetuation of these social dances depended on some willing to play the part of the criminal. The entire top-heavy administrative structure, policemen, detectives, informers, lawyers, district attorneys, judges, probation and parole officers, guards, wardens, prison psychiatrists, all were dependent on the hero star bad guy to make their good guy parts have meaning. Damn, dude. Damn. Yeah, a lot of those people will disappear if all of a sudden they're no longer needed. Think about that, ladies and gentlemen. The criminal were the fall guys, the victims who kept the whole game going. The solution was obvious. The prisoners had to turn on. See the game the way it was and then drop out. Just stop playing the bad boy game. See it, laugh at it, and drop out. So we made a contract. Everyone in the group would do everything he could to help every member to get out and stay out of prison. Not just sessions and discussions in the prison, but practical help in getting out and finding a job and dealing with life on the outside. We were proposing a family clan type group. This was very different from professional bureaucratic rehabilitation. The motto of the rehabilitation worker is detachment. Don't get emotionally involved with the client. You will be seduced or conned. A mass assembly line rehabilitation sequence in which the psychologist performs his test and turns the patient over to the psychiatrist, who treats the patient and sends him cured to the parole board, which decides on the basis of his own criteria whether to allow parole. The parolee is then investigated and supervised by parole officers. Complete dispersonalization all way down the line. The prisoner is treated this way because he comes from a family which either won't or can't help him. His clan had been fragmented. He is an isolated loner, an anonymous cog in the social machine. Our strategy was exactly opposite to the detached professional approach. The aim was to build a network of friends who would help each other. To construct a group that could perform some of the functions of the tribe. If a middle-class person gets in trouble, he is typically rescued by middle-class know-how, which bails him out. Get him a lawyer, talk middle-class jargon to the officials, get him a job, provide him with a middle-class home to return to. Our plan was to use the resources of our group, including middle-class know-how, to weave a web of protection for the convicts. Said Gandalf, "Well, let folly be our cloak, a veil before the eyes of the enemy, for he is very wise and weighs all things into a nicety. But the only measure that he knows is desire for power, and so he judges all hearts. Sell Elrond, the road must be trod, but it will be very hard. The quest may be attempted by the weak with as much hope as the strong. Yet such is oft the course of deeds that move the wheels of the world. Small hands do this because they must, while the eyes of the great are elsewhere." Interesting. The project moved rapidly into action. One of our members was coming up from a parole hearing. Johnny O'Connell, a genial Irishman. Johnny was caught by the standard dilemma of the lower class convict. In order to be paroled, he needed a job and a home. His family was disintegrated, helpless, uncaring, and could offer no home. And how could he get a job when he was uneducated, untrained, socially tarnished, and, being in prison, unable to canvass prospective employers? Unless something was done, he would meet the parole board and be turned back for another year of incarceration for the crime of not having a family, a tribal group to support him. You know, that's actually, that's a real tragedy sometimes when you have no one to support you. And that's why sometimes it's really important that you do hold the certain people close, because usually you need the support. And as much as it is part of our survival instinct, we need a tribe. But sometimes those same people that prop us up are the same ones that somehow keep us down. Gotta be careful with that. All about balance, baby. So we went to work first to get him a job. Johnny's occupations in the past had been itinerant and casual. Dishwasher, handyman, labourer. We phoned around Boston for an employer who wanted to guarantee steady employment to a dishwashing convict who was guilty of a few bad checks and who drank now and then. No takers. For a week, I spent most of my time meeting with restaurant owners and managers of construction companies. They were all encouraging, but no one was willing to sign a paper guaranteeing Johnny a job. Then we thought of the home-based solution. Harvard University was one of the largest businesses in Cambridge. Dozens of dining halls. We visited the Harvard Employment Office. There the officials were most sympathetic. Their interest led them to visit the prison. They listened attentively to the discussions about sessions and in return gave brief lectures about hard work, honesty, and responsibility. But for Johnny, there was no help because the month was May and the Harvard dining halls closed for the summer. There was nothing to do but hire Johnny ourselves. Take him into the family business. A letter was written on the stationery of the Harvard Center for Personality Research, guaranteeing a job on our project. We located a room in Cambridge, paid the rent, and Johnny had a home. With these documentary testaments to middle-class support, Johnny was released. Our first reconverted man was on the streets. When he reported to work for the research project, his first assignment was to find himself a job and to keep diary notes of his job hunting. At 5 o'clock each afternoon, he would return to the center with his report. The only jobs he could get were in large downtown cafeterias where he would be allowed to join that anonymous army of grey-faced, dead-eyed, muscatel-drinking drifters who'd clear dishes off tables and mop floors today and are gone tomorrow to the drunk tank. Such a job was guaranteed to push him into alcoholism. You know? Yeah. It's interesting that he's talking about that because we kind of forget, like we say, get a job, but I think we take for granted just how much that actually can ruin people depending on where they are. Like, I actually think a lot of my personal damage came from working at KFC for 4 years and then working in finance as a portfolio administrator and then working in hospitality some more. Yeah, mind you, I worked, did the job and all that other kind of thing, but man, I was dead inside, dude. You know? But like, it's only been recently since I've got so much to do, things to study, things to create, that I don't have that same sense of dread. And maybe that part there about jobs causing those kinds of addictions is probably really important to hear, because like the lack of purpose is always going to drive people into insanity. And sometimes having a job is just not enough. Jobs can affect mental health and addiction. And, you know, I kind of need to think about that too, honestly, because my situation is sort of similar at the moment, where I currently don't have work for about 2 weeks now, and I'm just doing this, hoping something takes off, hoping something sticks, but I should just stick to it because it should be my job. Anyway, enough of my weird, heartfelt diary entry on this podcast. Let's keep going. And every day at 5:30, Johnny would leave our office and go to his rented room. Anonymous, body on an impersonal bed in a strange chamber. The bars had TV and warmth and companionship. For 2 weeks, he continued to search, made endurable by the support of the graduate students who hung out in the project office. At least there were some people who knew and cared. And then came a job as an apprentice baker in a pizza parlor. It was a small shop where he would be known by everyone, where he would be a person. When Johnny came back from work the first evening, we all listened to his description of the place, where the girl cashier looked like, what the boss said to him, what his duties were. We passed the stories on to the cons at the prison, and they listened carefully to all the details. There was still the bad business of Johnny living by himself and having no friends. The only thing that he could do after work was hang out in the bar. This was expensive. It was also dangerous, leading to hangovers and oversleeping. There you go. If you got nothing to do, guys, this is going to be your fucking life. You know? And this is also a stark reminder for me too. Which is really interesting that I'm hearing about this now. And so it's really important that we all find our purpose and our calling, genuine calling, not what we think is our calling based off whether the job's in demand and we might be okay at it, or whether we should stick to something that because we love it or fancy ourselves as it, like our true calling. You know? And I think that's, for me, to do with mathematics, because a lot of weird stuff has happened since I started getting into the whole mathematical side of things. Synchronicities and all other kinds of things have just popped up out of nowhere, and I consider myself not fit for it. And here I am looking at studying physics and chemistry and the whole rest of it. So let's go. Let's continue. But Johnny didn't know any other way of spending time or money. $3 and 3 hours automatically went to the saloon. The idea of saving money, of purchasing anything except immediate essentials, of taking a vacation, of planning a career were as foreign to Johnny as to an Australian bushman? Damn, my fucking country got roasted by Leary. That's great. Damn. Something about Bushmen. It's actually so interesting, guys, because there's actually like in this bush area that I can walk to every now and then. He's definitely like someone who's been on meth or something like that, and he's living in the bush, and I guess you could call him a bushman. And the fact that he's like comparing him to an Australian bushman is, after I've had that experience, is just wild. So that's cool. Middle class behavior was as far removed from his experience as life on Mars. So let's emigrate Johnny to Mars. Let's expose him to the day-to-day routine of middle class American life where he could learn by observation. Johnny moved into my house, into the third floor attic that Bill Burroughs had just vacated. Johnny was a congenial householder, jolly with kids, easy with adults. He'd come home from work every night about midnight and have a beer and tell us about the pizza parlor. When the parole officer would drop around to make his surprise visits, the fibers of the house braced in empathetic protection. We're all members of a benign conspiracy to keep Johnny out of jail. For the first time in his life, he had a home and a protected family. But the price was expensive. It took commitment, caring, concern, sharing, an emotional thing that can't be taught in the professional schools or obtained by voting large appropriations for criminal rehabilitation. Back in prison, the program went on. Psychedelic trips, 2 or 3 a week, moments of confrontation, moments of terror, moments of joy. We were using the prison as a training center. The convicts were learning how to guide psychedelic drug sessions. Harvard graduate students were coming to go through the programs themselves. There was less distinction between psychologists and inmates. The new Harvard were assigned to veteran inmates for orientation and guidance. In session after session, the inmate guided the Harvards, and the Harvards guided the convicts. The energy generated by the session continued to spill out beyond the prison walls. The psilocybin session room became a showplace. Whenever visitors came to Cambridge inquiring about psychedelic drugs, we took them out to the prison. The convicts sat around the table giving lectures on their mystic experiences to Gerald Howard and Alan Watts and Aldous Huxley. Wow, even Huxley was there, man. That's cool. And the ex-king of Sarawak and coveys of visiting psychiatrists. The instinctive strategy was to do everything possible to enhance self-esteem, pride, and sense of accomplishment. Every power we could turn over to the convicts was a fiber in the body of growth we were constructing. As in any tribe, there were sectors of friction, resentment, and disappointments. Johnny O'Connell lost his job when the pizza parlor went out of business. Oh no. For a few days, he looked for a new job, and then he took to sitting around the house watching television and drinking beer all day. We tried LSD, heavier and heavier doses with no results. Johnny Wood treated psychedelics with the bravado of the Olympic booze champion. I can outdrink any man in the house. His pride was to prove he could take more and more sacrament without passing out. That might hit a little bit too close to home for me, actually. So one afternoon, we gave him 5 minutes to the normal dose of LSD. Johnny flipped out of his mind and spun up to heaven. He raved about the beauty. He laughed with joy. He saw it all. How do you like heaven, Johnny? The answer was straight 100 proof Irish. Tell God he's flubbed his job, Doc. There's no beer joint in heaven. So we bundled up in overcoats to take Johnny to a bar. We thought he might see through the booze scene. He walked into the bar with bravado, but it was too much for him. The bottles leered and mocked. Got to get the hell out of here. Maybe when you're tripping, it's sometimes a bit different to look at those kind of things or feel them. Sometimes maybe exposure while you're altered is probably not the worst kind of therapy. Later that night, he went back to the bar, ordered a beer, and turned the man next to him. Mister, you'll never believe where I went today and what I saw. The man next to him didn't believe him. Neither did Johnny. The next day, he was back to TV and beer. My irritation grew, but Johnny couldn't be moved. I gave him a week to find a job, and then I gave him $50 and told him he was on his own. In 2 weeks, he was back in prison, not for crime, because Johnny wasn't a criminal, but for idleness and beering. You know, this is actually like a really hard thing for people to get. So like, especially if you've got like lots of trauma and lots of damage, it can be really hard to break out of those ruts, especially with psychedelic medicine. And I imagine prisoners carry the most out of all of them. And I think that's just what happened to Johnny, unfortunately. So yeah, it doesn't always work. Well, I think it will always eventually work, but it takes time. It's not usually single dose and everything's fine. Sometimes, depending on the person. I imagine for prisoners, it would take more than a couple of trips to sort things out. By the fall of 1962, we had over 35 convicts and 15 Harvards in the group, and the men started being paroled out to the streets 2 and 3 a month. True fellowship among men must be based on a concern that is universal. It is not the private interests of the individual that create lasting fellowship among men, but rather the goals of humanity. That is why I said that fellowship with men in the open succeeds. I like that. We started Project Contact. The ex-cons and the Harvards were signed up in buddy system teams to visit the ex-cons in their homes. We drive around to slum areas of Brockton, Fall River, Worcester looking for our man. Then we'd go out and have a beer and find out how he was going. There was a 24-hour telephone to rush help in case of emergencies. Maxwell found himself broke, his wife leaving him and ready to knock over a store in rage and frustration. He'd phone our number and someone would drive over to meet him and spend an hour talking to him in an all-night cafeteria and lend him $10. We bailed them out of jail, sobered them up, hid them from the parole officer, cooled our angry bosses. We did ensure what the family does for its confused members, and we kept them out of jail. By this time, Operation Keephead had become a three-ring circus. There was the prison, there was the outside contact project, and there was the less visible but equally important task of keeping the state administrators and officials happy. We kept a steady flow of memoranda and progress reports to the myriad departments which focus a jealous eye on the work of rehabilitating criminals. It was clear to us that if a week went by without contacting the bureaucrats, cluing them in, making them a part of the game, the whistle would be blown on our game. What we were doing was highly implausible from the administrative point of view. Week after week for 2 years, we ran ecstasy sessions in a state prison, turning on with the prisoners, turning on visiting psychiatrists. We had converted the hospital ward into a spiritual center complete with incense, candles, and music. We did this with the approval of the most skeptical, wary group of politician pros on the American scene: cops, jailers, and parole officials. Our key was direct human contact. I spent 1/3 of my time in face-to-face interaction with the state officials. We invited them to the prison. We spent long hours over the lunch table, long hours driving to the state house to the probation headquarters. A lunch at the Harvard Faculty Club for the Commissioner of Corrections and his top lieutenants. Sharing of space-time, caring for them, caring for their opinions and for their approval. We even ran sessions for parole officers and correction officials. Some of them had unhappy trips. People committed to external power are frightened by the release of ecstasy because the key is surrender of external power. One chief parole officer flipped out paranoid at my house and accused us of a communist conspiracy and stormed around while Madison Presnell curled up on the couch watching amused at the white fox frantically learning how to get high. He grinned at me. So you call it the love drug? I can't remember which trip it was, but that sort of goes back to the same thing I was talking about. Like, not all trips are gonna be all love and light. Some are gonna be very, very nasty, and it's gonna make you aggressive and dangerous, possibly depending on what kind of person you are. And that kind of thing. And that's why like letting go is such like a huge proponent for the trips. By the next day, the parole officer looked back at when he had been and his voice shook in reverence. The administrators let the project go on for the same reason that administrators do anything: fear of criticism. Our work was succeeding and the prisoners knew it. Not just the inmates at Concord, but all over the state. The politicians had to go along with it. Harvard was back in the project and Harvard couldn't be flouted, but there was an underlying skepticism, a basic distrust about any enthusiastic new approach to prisoner rehabilitation. Let them try their new-fangled experiment, but the old hands knew that cons are cons and nothing can change them. In politics and administration, the great sin is idealism, bright-eyed vigor, and the highest virtue is cynicism. Faith, hope, and charity are dirty words. Nothing really changes except who has the power, who has the money. Everyone in the Massachusetts correctional system believed in his heart that our project would fail, that we would not lower the recidivism rate, that we would not convert hardened criminals. We just couldn't do it because we were running against the cultural momentum of American society, which is more laws, more cops, more lawyers, more judges, more prison psychiatrists, more control, and we were saying, give power away. If we were right, then the sphincter collapse of the society would have to be released. What language, man. Deep religious commitments were involved in the use of our little pill. I came into the warden's office one morning to report the most recent statistics. We had kept twice as many convicts out on the street as the expected number. Damn. We had half the crime rate. He listened politely, but he kept glancing toward the corner of the room. When I finished, he got up and clapped me on the back and led me to the corner. Look at that, he said proudly. It was an architect's color drawing of a super prison. Look, 2 football fields. This wing is for the meeting and orientation. 2 more cell blocks. Mess halls double in size. We'll have capacity for twice as many inmates, and we can double the staff all the way down the line. His eyes were glowing like anyone showing you his dream plan. Success. His fanny was coming true. A prison and an organizational table twice as big. The bureaucrat's goal. Oh, that's fucking disgusting, man. Imagine like one of your biggest dreams having a giant fucking prison. It's like, I can't think of anything more vulgar and disgusting and evil. Well, I can, but like, it's pretty vulgar and disgusting and evil to think that one of you, if you gleam at the eyes for a larger prison. It's like, but Warden, you're not going to need a larger prison. His face registered surprise. Why not? Because we're cutting your recidivism rate in half, remember? You won't need to have all the cells you have now. You won't need to have half the guards you now have. If you let us turn on your prison. The warden laughed. He liked me and felt protective towards our hopes. We were getting some of your men back. Kelly returned today in handcuffs. He was one of your men, wasn't he? Yes, Kelly had come back to the prison, and so were some others returning. They had not committed new crimes. They were returning cheerfully, peacefully, quietly, not making it on the other side, dropping out. Kelly was a good example. He had been paroled and went back to the slum housing project where his wife and 4 children awaited him. He walked in on a financial crisis. The state support money for families of prisoners stopped the day he got out. He had no job, 5 reproachable mouths to feed. His relations with his wife, never good, had been further strained by his imprisonment. His occupational assets, never good, were weakened by his prison record. So, yeah, it's hard, man. Definitely hard. Kelly was plunged, ill-prepared, into a tense, frustrating, almost hopeless situation. The pride, enthusiasm, and insight of his psychedelic sessions were eroding fast. Our outside contact team met with him and tried to get him a job. Kelly was hard to sell to an employer. Now, if you put yourself into Kelly's head, you get this perspective. The outside society of Boston is cold, demanding, degrading, inhospitable, heavy with responsibility, empty of reward. Kelly looks back at the prison, free food and lodging and a job. There he is a wanted man. He had a place, a role, but more than that, in the prison is the warmth of the group, the pride of belonging to the mushroom elite. The rare, unexpected ecstasy and venture of the psychedelic drug strip, the companionship. The session room was home. Like a hummingbird, Kelly started circling back to Concord. It was so easy. Just be drinking beer when the parole officers come to inspect and sound unenthusiastic about getting a job. That's heartbreaking, man. Like, the only place that you're actually wanted is inside of a prison cell, and it's the only place you have any sense of community or even purpose. To see, like, I think that's a massive failing to see that, like, someone can feel more purpose inside of a box in a prison than out in the real world in society. Just imagine that. Like, That's actually extremely sad and a massive failing. If some people feel that way about prison and in between prison and society, you know. Yeah. Anyway, I'll keep moving on because this is actually sort of heartbreaking, some of this stuff. Now, the first one was like the ninth trip was really great. It was heartwarming, but this one, it's heartbreaking. So, but we'll continue. Sorry, Kelly, but we have to pull your parole. You're going back. Kelly was going home back to his cellmates. The problem was that the close tribal fabric of the prison group was pulled apart in the city. Everything in the Boston culture was geared to push Kelly back to crime. So yeah, it's sometimes even the society itself that can actually just drive people back into their old patterns, no matter how much stuff you give, which is a big part of it. So like there needs to be actual change in the outside world for all this bullshit that we experience to stop happening. If we want less crime, we need to change how we give people purpose. We also need to stop with some of the petty bullshit that our own governments do. In every country, might I add, every country, and I mean fucking underline that. You know, it hurts to think about it actually, because when I think about it, that's sort of like a big role I have, because I do want to change that. I do want to see people actually gain a sense of purpose and not feel forced back into old patterns, which is what happens all the time. Damn. Yeah, so I'll just reread that last part and then we'll continue from there. The problem is that the close tribal fabric of the prison group was pulled apart in the city. Everything in the Boston culture was geared to push Kelly back into crime. We needed a tribal center, a halfway house, a place in Boston where the ex-cons could reinstate the closest of the prison group. The tribal tie had to be strong to protect its people in the brutal anonymity of the city. We started looking around for a house to rent. We ran into the usual problems. Landlords turned off when they learned that we were planning a center for ex-convicts. We didn't have the money or the energy to set up a house. It was obvious that we would have to live in the house ourselves with the ex-cons, sit around the home fire with them, become inmates with them, and we weren't ready to make that big step of love and commitment. We sat in our offices at Harvard and made great plans and sent men out to look for real estate. And then at 5 o'clock, we returned to our comfortable homes in the Boston suburbs, and the ex-cons went back to slums. Man. 6 in the second place means fellowship with men in the clan, humiliation. There is a danger here of formation of a separate faction on the basis of personal and egoistic interests. Such factions which are exclusive and, instead of welcoming all men, must condemn one group in order to unite the others, originate from low motives, and therefore lead in the course of time to humiliation. I should read the I Ching a bit more, actually, because it's more than just a book of, it's more than just an oracle. There's, like, weird wisdom in there that you can read, and it's quite interesting. I was actually really surprised when I got my copy of the I Ching by Alfred, some Chinese name. He's like some kind of master of I Ching, and he's Chinese, and I really like how he's written it, or how it was translated, or whatever. It's really good. In the sessions, we were all gods, all men at one. We were all 2 billion-year-old seed centers pulsing together. Then, as time slowly froze, we were reborn in the old costumes and picked up the tired games. We weren't yet ready to act on our revelation. The spark we had lit within each one of us was there, and we guarded it, but some flame had not yet burst forth. The judgment. Fellowship with men in the open. Success. If everyone to cross the great water, the perseverance of the superior man fervors. You know? Yeah. Anyway, guys, comes to our final one, and we are going to be doing Trip 11 next time, which is the number of magical expansion. And what's interesting is I think that's around the time that I'll probably pick up again is when there's this big solar event that's happening on the 8th of August, along with planetary alignments. So, yeah, when the celestial messenger comes wearing a fedora, can you suspend your games? Well, we'll see about that. But yeah, that was probably one of the biggest wake-up calls I heard reading that stuff, because it is true. Like, it maybe also, if we're thinking about psychedelics, like, nothing's going to change unless, like, the rules and how we integrate other people is going to change. Obviously, it was quite effective because they said, like, it was like they doubled their goal of the reincarceration rate, of like halving the reincarceration rate or something like that. But some actually had to go back to really rough circumstances. So, I think that's it for today. Hope you enjoyed this podcast, everyone. I am yours truly, Baphomet. Please like, share, subscribe to my Substack, and I will see you next time. Goodbye.